Thank you very much for the kind invitation. Thank you very much for CSIS for organizing this meeting, and to Ambassador for being here, and for all of you to be here today. This is a very important report for FAO. And let me start, before I say too much about the report, with a little video that we prepared. This little video, we discuss a lot the importance of it, and why we do it with kids. Is because we know there has been some evidence now that kids could influence the behavior of parents. And this video right in this moment is being mainstream in many of the schools in the world. We are doing it in several languages. And we also have developed a series of videos of youth where they explain the problem by itself. So again, FAO is trying to join all the efforts that are already existing in trying to tackle this issue. Now, what is this report and why it's bringing up? In 2011, FAO raised the awareness of food loss and waste by producing the number of 1/3 that everybody knows, and that really creates significant awareness of the importance of what is happening in terms of food loss and waste. Since then, the issue has gained an increased attention and also became part of the SDGs. It's the SDG target 12.3, which is calling for food loss and waste reduction, and it has a specific target for waste. In losses, it just referred to the reduction of losses. But now that we know of the importance of food loss and waste, what we wanted to understand is a little bit more about the details of what that third meant and how we can decompose it, and why it's so important to decompose it in these two indicators. So today we are talking of an indicator of food loss index and indicator of food waste index. It's really important because we need to target how to resolve the problem, and the players and the stakeholders in each of the different elements of the food loss and of the food waste are different. And we need to find and try to understand what is behind it and where are the hot spots where we can reduce food losses. So what this report tries to do is try to understand all that and trying to give more detail on the information. So as a result of that, we will have a new number, of course, for the food loss index, and I hope soon, with the support of UNEP, we will have the number for the food waste indicator, waste index that we are calling today. But the goal is to try to find ways to better achieve SDG target 12.3, and that's where we are aiming towards the achievement of this report. Now, what are we bringing in terms of the definition of food losses, which is extremely important? We did, together with other colleagues of CSIS 2030 initiative, I was involved in a review of around 7,000 papers on the topic of food loss and waste. That's the advantage of having machine learning and artificial intelligence. You can do that faster today. And what we found is that in a significant amount of these papers, the definition was completely different. So everybody was using his own definition of what losses meant, and what even they confuse a lot waste and losses. So what this report is trying to do is to come with a very clear definition. And the definition for food loss is basically from the post-harvest up to the wholesale included, so before the retail. So from post-harvest up to the wholesale included before the retail. And food waste is from the retail up to the consumer. UNEP will work on the food waste index. We are working on the food loss index. Now, given that we capture from the post-harvest to the wholesale market, there is a lot of spots in the value chain that we need to look at. Even the post-harvest result could be a consequence of what is happening in the pre-harvest and even in the production side. And that's something also that FAO is looking very carefully. So what we want to bring now is this clear definition that will help us to better understand the problem. And that allows us to come with a very concrete number and allow us to understand where the problems are. Why? Because it's central that we all are benchmarking a common definition. If not, many of the studies don't say the same thing, and you will see later on in my presentation how the range of the measurements of losses and waste vary across country and commodity. Even within the same region, the same country, and the same commodity, you will have an enormous variance of what it has been measured. And when you look at the papers and you try to understand why the differences, is basically because of the definition. So our urge, and this is consistent with WRI, what they have been doing, they have a huge initiative on this topic too. So our goal here, together with our partners in this report, is to try to come up with clarity of what we mean by food losses. Okay, so that from now onwards, when we refer to it, we are very, very stringent in assessing the importance of the definition, so that we have a common indicator, and which will allow us to track what is the evolution and the performance of this indicator over time. Now, what is the number? So the number that we have today under the food loss is around 14.40%. This is 13.8% to be exact, but we mentioned 14%. Now, this number will vary substantially region by region, but essentially at the regional level, we will have estimates, as you can see here. For the case of Central Asia, the numbers could be better, but for the case of Sub-Saharan Africa, it's also over the 13.8%. And also we have an issue in North America and Europe, which is mostly because of Eastern Europe, and especially most on the sides of West. Now, this is what we are trying to bring up as the correct number to be used from now onward. So we need to be careful that the number will vary at the sub-regional level, and now we know exactly how this is going to happen. And I will show you at the end where we are trying to bring this data available to everybody, which is a new change in FAO, that now everything we do will have the data in a public domain, so that everybody can look at it and can replicate what we are doing and can understand, as it was mentioned before, what are the limitations, and from there we can even keep improving and keep moving it up. Now, also, if we look at the different commodities, the variation of the index will also change. And what we are trying to do here is basically to look at the range of the food loss and waste and the wholesale and retail. And here we combine both, because we need to come up also with this aggregate indicator based on the literature review. So what we are doing here is taking advantage of this enormous review and trying to figure out what are the different levels that we find at the different types of commodities. So you have cereals and pulses, and then you have also fruits and vegetables as an example. The vertical bar that you see there is basically the median of the indicator for the different types of commodities for the different regions. So the orange there, the lighter one, is the Central Asia. Then you have the red one, which is Eastern and Southern Eastern Asia, Northern America, and Europe, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, this is the median, no? So the median of the distribution. But when we keep looking at it, and we keep to look at the top and bottom quartiles, the top 25 and the bottom 25, look at the spread that we have in the number. Even if we look at the variance, look at the variance that we have, for example, for Sub-Saharan Africa, for the case of fruits and vegetables. So that's exactly the point I was referring before. This is based on the literature. This is not the number of the 13.8. This is based on what we have as an evidence in the literature, in all these papers that we have looked at, and what is the range that we are observing in terms of food loss and waste in the market. So it's very important, again, as I mentioned before, to find ways in which we reduce this amount of indicators, because most of them, this huge variance, is explained because of this different definition in each of the different ways it was measured in the past. Now, why is this so important, and why we want to work and to put a lot of emphasis from now onwards? Of course, there is a lot of effort already happening, because it could help to improve food security and nutrition. So we need to find how, especially at the producer side, we can improve and reduce the presence of food loss. It reduces natural resource use, water, land, but also emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and it could also improve productivity and economic growth. Because if we are able to produce more efficiently, of course, we will be able to have more labor available to do other activities. And these are linked directly to many SDGs around the board. Now, why is these three dimensions so central? These are exactly the dimensions of the food system approach. Because it's not only increasing productivity or reducing loss to have more food available, it's also to be more sustainable in terms of natural resource use, and it's also to be more sustainable in terms of reduction of emissions. Because once a commodity has arrived, a food commodity, the market, there is an enormous amount of emissions that were already done that we are going to lose if we don't use that food properly. And that's where we need to be careful. Now, one of the differences with the previous definition, the one that was 1/3, is that the 1/3 definition assumed that all the food that was used for other, like for example for seeds or for feedstock, were losses. And we believe that was wrong, because it's really food available which is being used for other processes. So that is no longer considered as a food loss. And that could explain a little bit the difference between what we had before in terms of the food loss. So we have been very careful in the report. You will look at it carefully to try to explain exactly what are the differences between how it was previously measured and how we are currently measured. Also, in this new way of measuring food losses, we are including the value of food, which is really important. Staples, basic staples are different to fruits and vegetables. They have different values, and that's what we need to incorporate in the capture of that. So we are also including the concept of quality of food through the mechanisms of their values and through the weights we're putting. Now, what is the report trying to bring? And I'm sorry that the colors don't look too much, but the bottom arrows are orange and the top arrows are dark red. So basically, what we refer in the bottom arrows is that demand shrinks and production falls, income is affected. So, and in the red arrows, what we are saying is lower prices, more disposable food for all. So if I am able to touch food losses at the beginning of the value chain, okay, that will benefit the producers. It will allow us to use better the natural resources, and then it will move up in the value chain. So the earlier I go in the value chain, the better it is for food security issues, because it will allow more availability of food. It will allow better prices, lower prices, of course, for consumers, but it will allow producers to be able to do substitution effects and to find other ways to do activities. But if I just reduce food losses at the end of the value chain, that will shrink the demand, and that will, for sure, affect the producers, because I will have an excess surplus at the demand side. So the price will go down, and that will affect the whole value chain backwards and don't give too much choice to the producers. So I need to be careful on what I do and how it will impact food security and nutrition. So, for example, in countries where I am more food insecure, what I would like is to have interventions at the beginning of the value chain, because that's where I will increase the availability of food to farmers and to consumers that will allow us to have a better response. But when I am at the end of the value chain, like in developed countries, my goal is basically to reduce food waste, because that's where I will get a bigger impact in terms of reduction of emissions, for example. Because all that commodity that moves across the value chain already has accumulated this level of emissions that I want to avoid losing, because it's already an investment. So this is very important to understand, that the policy that I want to tackle is different depending where I am in the value chain, and the results will be different and the effects will be different. That's very important. And understanding the hotspots and where the losses are occurring mostly will help us enormously to target the interventions and to be able to move forward on this. And we are working also with the World Bank and others, with IFPRI, to try to find ways in which we can tackle this in the best possible ways, and with WRI. But that's essential to understand where the losses are occurring and what will be the different impacts. And let me give you a very simple example. If I am a farmer, okay, and that's the macroeconomic approach, the individual approach, here I have farmers, and these farmers are doing an investment to reduce losses. The reason why they were having losses in maize was because of aflatoxins. Okay? So this is a fungus that we know creates cancer to the liver, and also we have some evidence that it affects stunting. So you are producing maize, all of you produce maize. They decided to do an investment as small farmers and to reduce the presence of aflatoxins. And the way to do it is basically to dry properly the maize and to store it properly. But to be able to store it properly, you need to dry it at a certain level of humidity. If you don't put that level of humidity, it can even be worse when you put it in the hermetic plastic bags, for example. On this side, I have the same farmers, and they don't do it. Okay? So you invest your money, your little capital, because you were told by FAO and the World Bank and everybody else, do this investment, do this change, and you guys said, no, we don't believe these guys. And then I am the market, and you come to sell it to me. And I don't differentiate the price between aflatoxin-free maize and regular maize. So then what you do next? You throw me rocks and you throw me out of the town, because nothing happens. So how I can force you to change your policy to create this investment to reduce losses if the market is not recognizing in their standards what is aflatoxin-free and what is maize with aflatoxin? So this brings up the point that the individual effect is very important and not necessarily consistent with the aggregate effect. So this idea of the invisible hand doesn't work too well. Because the invisible hand is saying that if everybody at the individual level optimizes, then I should get an optimal at the aggregate level. But if the policies are not working properly, and we are not giving the standards in the market and the price premium for the effort you are going, then you won't implement the policy. And that's what we try to do now. We try to understand the whole value chain and what is need to be done to be able to achieve these results. And the same applies when we look at the reductions, as I was mentioning before. This is basically showing for the different regions what will be the reduction in the case of emissions, depending where I do the reduction in losses. And as I was referring before, the biggest impact will be at the end of the value chain. That's clear at the consumption part, at what we call the waste part. Because all these commodities has accumulated a set of emissions across the value chain that I'm going to lose if I waste them and I don't use them properly. So that's very important to be able to understand and to be able to take into account when we do these policies. So the report puts a lot of emphasis in these types of different interventions. Again, the dark red ones are environmental sustainability, and the orange are food security and nutrition objectives. On the dark ones, which are at the top, basically what we are saying is that we will gain more in terms of policy, in terms of reduction of emissions, plastic reduction, if we do the interventions at the end of the supply chain, at the waste side. But we will gain more in terms of increasing water quality and reduce water scarcity and preserving land if we do it at the beginning of the value chain. And then, of course, that will create more income and will allow farmers to make different choices. But if we do it at the end, that could affect the prices of the will, of course, benefit the consumers through prices, but could affect the producers because of the reduction in prices. But I could also improve the quality and nutritional content at the end. So how I design my policy objectives and how I combine them is very important. Now, again, one thing is to think on today what is happening, and this is what this is reflecting, is a static view of where I'm going to reduce the losses. But for sure, if I want to avoid problems in the future, I have to look at the whole value chain. No? What I want is to avoid products moving to the end that won't be consumed, and therefore reduce the emissions that I'm going to do. So it's very important to understand what policy target you have and where you need to do it in the value chain to be able to achieve the results that we want to achieve. Now, FAO at this point have generated these improved estimates on food loss, and there is a portal that I will give you the link at the end that shows exactly all the information that we have collected. You can look country, commodity, you can do all the sums you want to understand the data that we are handling at this point. We are doing a huge effort to improve the way data is collected. There is a huge still data gap. And you know, people say, okay, but that's very costly. Sure, but in this case, it's very, very important to understand where the losses occur. So we are working with all our country partners to deploy the best possible data collection process that will allow us to identify the hotspots, and we are already piloting that. We are working with several partners on this. This is not FAO alone. We are creating a coalition so that the data is collected not only through the public sector, but also through the private sector, but with very clear standards, a very consistent definition, as I explained before. And finally, FAO will assist countries to identify these critical losses points, and we try to bring private sector also to be able to minimize those critical losses points. We think it's essential for us to take action. We want to comply with the SDGs. And what we are doing is, as I told you, all the data is available in that website. I don't want to make the click because it will take longer, but you can click into it, and you will see all the data available that we have. Our job right now is to change the way we act to be more effective. We have an instrument, we have an index now, a clear index with a clear definition. We will be able to track over time. Every time we will keep improving in the quality of the information in that indicator of losses. UNEP will focus on the waste indicator, but that will allow us to be able to track carefully the performance of all the different interventions that are happening today in terms of reduction of losses. So we will deploy a portal by countries. We are starting with 53 countries. We will be tracking exactly what is the performance of the evolution of the food loss index every year indicator so that we can assess how things are going at the aggregate level on the different interventions and policies around the world. So we hope that this could be useful. This could bring some accountability, not only to FAO, but to all the players. And we hope that this will help us to create a big change in terms of access of reduction losses and, of course, waste. But doing correct policies at the correct point in the value chain. Again, we need to be careful. We don't want to affect the farmers. If the policy is not correct, like in the case of maize, that the standards are being recognized and they get a premium for the effort they are doing. If we don't do that properly, then we are basically not resolving the problem sustainable. Thank you very much. I think it's important, and you mentioned it, to be very careful that that meat or milk creates a bigger level of emissions doesn't mean that we shouldn't consume it. There are regions of the world that clearly need it because of the micronutrients behind, and we need to make them have access to them affordable. The only point which is pretty complicated, at least in my view, is that many countries which are very efficient in the way they produce cattle, for example, are trying to comply with their commitments to reduce level of emissions in the world, while other countries which produce today very inefficiently are not able to do it because they are not in the frontier of the technology. So the question there is why we don't have tradable emissions, for example. So if I have New Zealand reducing the level of cattle they produce to comply with the commitments for reduction of emissions, when New Zealand is producing in the most efficient way, why I don't use those resources to improve the quality of production of meat in another country which is emitting a lot because of the way they are producing, and then trade those levels of emission. I think we need to find innovative ways to achieve the global target that we want relative than to think in silos by countries and by silo commitments rather than allowing trades, which the Kyoto Protocol allow for that.
So you talked about in your presentation of kind of a new definition and also the challenge of collecting data. But so often, many of us know when we talk about food loss and waste, we always talk about 30%, 30%, 30%. And now you're telling us, oh, maybe it's more like 14%. And so my question is, even if this is more accurate, do you worry that a lower number will make people less motivated to act?
Not at all, because again, the 1/3 is food loss and waste. The 30.8% or the 14% we refer is only food losses. Okay? Now, the waste could be even bigger. We don't know yet. We'll see. So you know, the third looks nice, but the third was an aggregate number that doesn't allow you to say where the problem is. The split between losses and waste will give us a lot of more information to be able to identify where the problem is and how to bring a solution. So we are not saying at all that it's lower or higher. What we are saying is now we know how we have a common definition that everybody should try to replicate. And that's a plea to everybody to use the same definition. The second thing is we will know where to target better because the players are different. In the waste, you have more the consumers and the retail stores. So you can put policies targeted to that. In the losses, you are more on the production, on the transportation, and the wholesale part, and the storage part. So we can now do policies more targeted to reduce the hotspots with a better definition and by splitting and looking at the hotspots. But at not point we are saying that we are succeeding and we are in a lower number. That's not the case.
Thank you.
But let me become more on the moralistic side. You know, we have 121 million people unnourished, 2 billion people that don't eat the quality of food they are supposed to eat. So the thing is dramatic, okay? And we need to be very serious about this. And of course, we need to assume that we cannot reduce food losses to zero. That doesn't make any sense, and it won't work because it's not economical suitable. But on the other hand, technologies at the production side are in a pretty cheap, bad condition, especially for smallholders. So for example, the example I refer on maize, one of the major problems we found is drying technologies for smallholders. They don't exist. The ones that exist are pretty cost ineffective. Yeah. And if you don't dry properly your maize, you will have significant amount of losses. So we are at a level that any technology that can help us is useful. I wouldn't, so all the apps you are saying are great and we should keep using them, but we need to find other bigger solutions. If you go to the most high-tech situation in agriculture where everything is used in a more efficient way is vertical farming and horizontal farming, especially horizontal farming on controlled environments. But that requires electricity, requires access to potable water, and requires especially high-tech human capital. But that's the one that is using the water in the most efficient way, the soils in the most efficient way, and is reducing losses at the production level up to the post-harvest to the maximum. But you cannot assume that that will happen in developing countries too quickly. So that would be my choice in terms of technology. But again, I think it's important to understand that any app, for example, right now in many countries are not possible for one simple reason. Poor farmers don't know how to read and write. So forget about the connectivity, the electricity that they assume that they can pay. They even don't know how to read and write, and the level of illiteracy is huge. So we need to find ways that will help to resolve this type of problems. Perfect. On the film, it's completely available. We want to translate to several languages. The whole concept of the film, so there was a lot of discussion if we should do it because it looks kids, so not necessarily will influence policymakers. But the belief is that if you look at the messages, they're pretty solid. No? So And we also want to change behavior through kids. And we know that that works. I have working a lot on that, and I know we have papers with RCTs and all things that we know that that works. The important thing is that we need to massively distribute it. And in Rome, we already have agreed with all the schools. We are trying to push in other European countries. We would love to push it in the schools in the US, because the advantage of doing it at the schools is that you have a huge impact because it's cost saving. Everybody's in one location. Mostly schools will have access to computers, especially in developed countries and in many developing countries. So you can touch kids in a big amount, and then they will be your spillovers to adults. Not only to adults, but to kids, but also to adults through upward intergeneration. So please send an email to us. The video is available on the website of FAO, but if you don't get it, our local office can give you the video, and if we need translations to other languages, we are more than happy to work on that. Then on the question of reabsorption and CO2, so there is a lot of work that we are doing on soil management to be able to help that level, forestry, of course, but then there are many other things that the FAO is working on, so I'm more than happy to link you with the people working on that. Now, on our own life, so the video was one of the ideas that we have. We also have this sequence of videos of youth. If you look at my Twitter account, you will see all the youth videos, which has been also having a huge impact. And this is done for free. So we have a youth committee that we set up, and they do it for us. They basically take the content and they try to work with it in the best way that is approachable. So any way that we can achieve this is more than welcome. The food safety issue is central. I think is extremely important because, as you said, and we handle the Codex Alimentarius, as part of one of the entities that we host at the FAO. But it's essential because of foodborne diseases and because of food unsafety. You lose a lot of food also, like the aflatoxin example I was giving, and there are many others because of the quality of water and the waterborne diseases in the fruits and vegetables, for example. So I think that's something that we need to tackle. We are working very closely with WTO, especially on the trade part, but we're also working in our own entities to try to find ways to keep improving on the Codex Alimentarius, and to try to bring also all other elements linked to nutrition, for example, which is important. Now, on the private sector, that's really important for us. FAO now has a new initiative called Hand in Hand, which is trying to target the least developed landlocked countries, least developed small islands, and countries in food crisis, and countries which are less developed, large, but at the subnational level. That initiative is developing a platform, an online platform that is going to track all the investments in roads, all the investments in energy and in ICTs. We have done a partnership with ITU to be able to deploy. So why is so important? Because if I want to develop a value chain today in Uganda, for example, or in Tanzania, and the roads is the problem, so it takes me 3 hours to move, including the problems of corruption, like stopovers, then that won't work in the short term. But if I know that MCC is building a road that will do that, like, for example, in northern El Salvador, you have an amazing highway that we need to use better, that was built by MCC. So if we know that the road is being built and will be ready, then we have time to deploy and then bring the system together. So because that will resolve a big problem that takes a huge investment. So we're trying for those countries, which are 53 right now, to try to let the countries know what is happening in their countries, and so that they can coordinate complementarities of investment. And we hope just that information will help. It's amazing, but today you don't know over the space of the countries where the ODA is going and what interventions are happening. It's very difficult. So we're trying to do that, but that's central to create the needed complementarities. And we're also launching, together with the bank, WRI and Rabobank and the Netherlands, an initiative to do de-risking of private investments in the hotspots of losses in IDA and less developed countries. So it's another way of de-risking the investment of private sector, but showing to them that it could be profitable because the institutionality is there, the conditions are there, and there's something to work out. And finally, the standards are central. We don't have standards in many countries, and the private sector don't find it attractive to be able to do the investment to improve the quality of the commodity unless they have an international market already arranged. But that for local markets is really important.